The reason I mentioned that is because we don't. Actually.
Morning, good morning. Just say
I was wondering if maybe
for
you
being
probably
here today.
that same guy.
Welcome to the World Council of Atlanta's keynote luncheon with Congressman Austin Scott. My name is Rickey Bevington. I'm president of the council. Our pleasure to host you all today. Who here has never been to a World Affairs Council Atlanta event? Wow, we've got some newcomers. Wonderful. Well, let me take this opportunity to tell you about who we are. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit civic organization. We're dedicated to amplifying informed thought leadership that prompts new thinking on critical global issues. And we achieve this by doing this, by curating in-person as well as online opportunities for people to come together to explore and discuss global affairs. Throughout the year, we feature diplomats, dignitaries, executives, and subject matter experts, providing world-class analysis of issues ranging from geopolitics and foreign policy, trade in the economy, armed conflict, and humanitarian issues, and everything in between. We provide independent, nonpartisan, continuing education and networking for all Atlantans. Please join me in thanking the team who's here with us in the backgrounds who made today possible. Thank you so much. So many people leave thank yous to staff and personnel to the end, and I honestly, we're sitting in these chairs, we're enjoying this wonderful lunch because of their hard work over many months. And they represent the World Affairs Council of Atlanta, the Robinson College of Business, as well as Georgia State University. Our presenting sponsor today is Denton's, and here to make some welcome remarks is Denton's partner and World Affairs Council of Atlanta Board Director, Sam Olens.
Thank you. So my responses are going to be really short. It's our honor to be associated with the council. It's our honor to work with the other board members to make sure that Rickey and the college become as successful as they can be, and she's done a great job in that capacity. Denton's is the former McKenna Long. We're about 12,500 lawyers in the world, about 1,100 lawyers in the United States. We're in about 45 cities in this country, about 200 cities in the world. If there's a country that you want to do business in, we're pretty much in that country. Which of course is a natural fit with the World Affairs Council and their whole mission to educate folks about what's going on in the world. So with that, sure, we'll do a great job with Congressman Scott. Thank you.
And our supporting council today is YKK, and this is the YKK representative today. Thank you to YKK's Jim Reed and your colleagues for your support. Jim is president of YKK Corporation of America and also chairman of the council's board of directors. Thank you for being here, Jim. I would also like to recognize other World Affairs Council of Atlanta board directors here with us this afternoon. We have Christina Falcone of UPS. Thank you for being here, Christina. And Jim Peruz of Truist, who's also here. Thank you for being here, Jim. Board directors Rocky Reef of Coca-Cola and Huali of Home Depot could not attend in person, but they did send their colleagues in their stead. Thank you to Coca-Cola and UPS folks for being here with us today, rather Home Depot folks for being with us here today. And finally, we have some students. Do we have students in the room today? Would you please stand and let us applaud you? Thank you. We love to have students at our events, so thank you all. I know you've probably graduated or your semester's done with, so thank you for taking time out of your schedules to improve yourselves with some conversation with the congressman. Some housekeeping. The statements made today are those of the speaker and not of the World Affairs Council of Atlanta. This program is on the record. It's actually being recorded as well, so we have it. So when you ask a question, it is on the record. And now we'll introduce our esteemed speaker this morning. Congressman Austin Scott is in his 8th term as the U.S. representative for Georgia's 8th Congressional District, which covers central and south central Georgia from just north of Macon to the Florida border. It includes the cities of Perry, Cordele, Tifton, Moultrie, Valdosta, and portions of Macon. He is Georgia's longest serving Republican in Congress. Congressman Scott is the Vice Chairman of the House Agriculture Committee and the Chairman of the Subcommittee on General Farm Commodities, Risk Management, and Credit. He focuses his work on issues important to Georgia's farmers and rural communities, including increasing export market access and free trade agreements, bolstering grant programs for rural communities, strengthening crop insurance and disaster assistance programs, bridging the digital divide in rural America, and modernizing agencies within the committee's jurisdiction, like the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Commodities Futures Trading Commission. As a leading member of the House Armed Services Committee, Congressman Scott fights to ensure we have the best equipped and trained military in the world, including capabilities to combat adversaries like China, Russia, and Iran. He works with military leaders to strengthen the missions at Robbins and Moody Air Force bases in Georgia's 8th District and provide the tools our warfighters need to keep our country safe. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Congressman Austin Scott. So I had all of these great questions prepared about your time on all of your various committees, but we have some big news today. So hopefully you've all read the news. Major news out of Ukraine, out of China, and the Middle East. So let's start with the Trump administration's negotiations over the weekend in Switzerland, but ultimately agreed with China to significantly but temporarily reduce tariffs. Given the significant role of agriculture and manufacturing in Georgia's 8th District, how have recent tariffs impacted?
The big picture on tariffs with agriculture is the commodity prices are swinging. I mean, what we grow swinging pretty dramatically anytime there's discussion of a tariff or a tariff going away. And if you're the farmer, you're trying to plan on what you're going to grow, that obviously has a tremendous impact. And the thing that's different about agriculture and farming is you can't just wait and do it next month, right? You have these planning windows that you have to get into, and you have the equipment that you already have payments on. And I asked one of our farmers, I'm like, why are you even planting cotton this year when nobody thinks you can break even on it? Because they've got payments on cotton farmers. And so it was a good answer. I think they're going to plant as few acres as they can of cotton, probably shift more to other commodities. But if you talk to a banker that banks a farmer, they will tell you there is no commodity today, right now in the state of Georgia, that actually pencils out where the farmer can come anywhere close to breaking even on what they're going to grow. Fortunately, they continue to grow because we need them. We need the food supply, and don't underestimate the value of that food supply to our country.
What are you hearing from manufacturers?
They want the swings to be more moderate. And so, when you move from, an extremely high tariff to maybe half of that, as you're buying commodities that you're going to use in the manufacturing process, it becomes tough to price your product. And so I think it's the swings that have most of our manufacturing companies concerned. I'll tell you, just generally speaking, so I supported the concept of the reciprocal tariffs with the hope to get to a zero-based tariff system. I don't support the escalatory nature of it. I don't support it going, 100+% one day and half that happens. What happens if you're on the wrong side of that purchase date? And then the other aspect of it is, if the tariff is off today, when is it? It would only be assessed when you actually receive the product into the United States of America, right? So you don't know what that tariff is going to be. It's here. So there are a couple of issues outside of tariffs with China. China's obviously the big one. But President Trump, and I have not spoken personally with him about this, but I know from his comments, very much wants the Chinese government to stop, at least to hinder the flow of fentanyl precursors to the cartels. And the government of China very much has the ability to hinder the flow of those precursors to the cartels. It's killing a lot of Americans. that's something that I'm confident he wants to see in a negotiation. And the other thing is we have to keep in mind that China is no longer just an aggressive economic competitor. They are embedding themselves into the infrastructure in the United States, where if we did end up in a conflict, or if they did decide that they wanted to take Taiwan, they could create tremendous disruptions in our lives inside the United States of America. That's not something that an economic competitor does. That's something that an adversary does.
Can you share more about, this is from your position on the House Armed Services Committee, I see.
Well, that's also in my position on Intel, so no, I can't. Sure, hold on. But what I will tell you is that, just what I said, we want China to be an economic competitor. We're fine with it being an aggressive economic competitor, but many of the things that they're doing, are adversary. And I would tell you, you can just think through the ability to shut down water systems or to disrupt traffic flows. They're very creative in what they've done. And they're also very creative when you mention agriculture. If you look at Kim China, what they've done, where they have embedded themselves in the supply chain of the global food supply. And so I don't blame them for being smart. I blame us for not paying attention to what they were doing for many years. I don't blame it on one person. We have to accept the fact that as of right now, they are not just an aggressive economic competitor, they're an adversary.
Sticking with your work on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, how is how are you addressing cyber attacks? Is it cyber attacks?
That's cyber is obviously a very serious concern of ours. The ability to create chaos in our country is a very serious concern of ours. I know there were some people here from banking. I was talking with them earlier. I mean, you're not just talking about state actors when you're talking about cyber, right? It's very cheap to carry it out. It's very expensive to defend against it. And then, how do you have, your local community bank is going to have to call somebody. And there seems to be this resistance in a lot of areas today to the federal government assisting with things. But ultimately, there have got to be the sharing arrangements, in my opinion, the sharing arrangements of the information and the technology between the government and the private sector. And there's gonna have to be some release of liability for the private sector. And there is today. It needs to be clarified with what that release of liability is as we write the next piece of legislation. And it's called CISA, not be confused with Critical Infrastructure Security Agency. But the sharing of information is key to that. And in order for the private sector to share their information with the government on any cyber related attacks, they've got to be very comfortable that there would be a release of liability.
And CISA falls under the Department of Homeland Security.
It does, and CISA is also the name of a law that deals with the sharing of the information. And it was a 10-year law. The renewal of that is coming around in the next year or so, and I think that you'll see. Hopefully, you'll see it renewed. Hopefully, you'll receive it renewed for at least another decade, and hopefully, there's clarification of release of liability for the private sector and sharing the information.
Well, George is no stranger to
We're
that.
not talking about sharing someone's personal private information. We're talking about sharing what happened.
Well, on the topic of sharing, in terms of sharing intelligence with other countries, how concerned are you that our allies may not share vital information right now?
Yeah, so you got what's happening in the paper, the yan back and forth, if you will, sometimes, and then you got what actually happens with the people that are in operations that have a very close personal relationship, and those very close personal relationships still exist. I don't think what has happened in the political arena has made its way necessarily into the operations arena yet. We need to make sure that it doesn't. And then, when we have those partnerships like we have with the Five Eyes, it's the 5 countries that we share information. Yeah, we'll work with most countries individually on intelligence. With the Five Eyes, it's just a different level of partnership that we have with them. And, we need those partnerships because the same people that are doing it to us are doing it to them. We may see it first or they may see it first. But we still have a very good relationship with those organizations, and I expect them. The politicians will be the politicians, and people in the intelligence agencies, just like the people in the military, continue to carry on their mission.
Even over the course of years, you said for now operationally it's still working.
I think we'll continue to work. I think that our factories are dependent on.
So let's switch to, speaking of working with allies, let's switch to global defense cooperation. Right. Why is it in the national interest to have?
Because that has led to not necessarily a peaceful close, but we have not had a world war since the 40s, and I think that the international partnerships and the cooperation have helped with that. And I think that they've helped us live a higher standard of living economics. I think those partnerships go beyond just who you fight with. When I say fight with, I mean fight side by side with, not against. And I think that it's good for economics as well.
How do you consider the Trump administration's recent acts? Are they antagonistic toward allies? Are they helpful?
Okay, so you want to go to NATO specifically?
Sure, let's go.
Let's go to NATO specifically. I'm on the NATO Parliamentary Board, and so I'll tread some water here. And then when I finish, nobody will like what I had to say. I think NATO is extremely important, and I think we have to do a better job of whether it's coordinating intelligence or weapon systems or economic assistance. I think the partnership matters. There are a couple of things that have been damaging to the partnership in the past, and I'll say the recent past. One is they have not done what I consider to be an equitable amount from the standpoint of finance and burden sharing with regard to weapon systems, with regard to the areas that matter in the next fight with China. Russia is no longer a near peer adversary after Afghanistan. But if they had, we could have simply handed off things to other NATO countries that there were no questions about their support of Ukraine. But those countries don't have the capacity to do it without us, and they need the capacity to do it without us. They should have the capacity to do it without us. And part of that is that they have not invested the amount of money, and part of it is that some of them still think that the next war is going to be like World War II, where it's going to be trench warfare. And it's simply not. I mean, the next war is going to be, it's going to be cyber, it's going to be spectrum, it's going to be space. Intelligence is going to play a tremendous part of stopping the next war. And so our NATO partners have not invested an appropriate amount, and they have not invested in the appropriate areas to be the good partner. So it is fair for our leadership as a country to go over there and say, why aren't you doing the things that you need to do in these areas? And we're not going to allow you to depend on the U.S. taxpayer to put up as much as we are when you're not putting up your share. So I think that's fine. The thing we did under Republican administrations that I thought was wrong, I did not think we should have elevated. I did not think that we should have elevated him to the status of meeting with the United States of America. He's clearly the aggressor in Ukraine. And I disagree with the decision to meet with Putin. Now, let me tell you this. I was on the NATO Parliamentary Board. I was in Brussels the day that Russia moved into Ukraine. Not the first time, but the last time. Our NATO partners did not want to talk with us about what was happening in Ukraine. The only thing they wanted to talk to us about was what we did to them in Afghanistan. And this is being glossed over by the press, but I'm just telling you what the Biden administration did when our NATO partners and others had been with us for over 2 decades fighting in Afghanistan. And we walked in there, we did not have a discussion with them about when everybody could have their equipment and their troops out. We walked in there, we told them we're leaving on this date. It was a one-way discussion. We did not listen to what they had to say. And good partners don't do that to other people. And so there have been some things in the relationship for sure. But don't underestimate what the United States did in walking out of Afghanistan did to the NATO partnership. And that was done. That decision was contrary to the advice of our military commanders and contrary to the advice of NATO's.
If you had the ear of Pete Hegseth or others who could, make it right, what would you advise them?
We need to have continual progress that is mutually beneficial, and we need to help them in the areas like space, spectrum, the other things that are so expensive. There are areas where we can do some sharing that I think would help NATO get to the point that they need to be, but NATO has a responsibility. Each and every one of the countries has a responsibility to accept that they have to put in their fair share or their equitable amount, whatever we want to call it. And then there has to be a strategy with where that money is spent.
The World Affairs Council had a symposium on Friday. We discussed European defense policy. And that was a big theme is NATO or the US or other allies going to be investing in not old fashioned, but fighter jets, aircraft carriers, or are we going to be investing in cybersecurity, spectrum, or space? Heading into the NATO summit, what is the US's, if you can comment, what is the US going to recommend as we head into the NATO summit in June?
Okay, so I have not seen what we will recommend. What I will tell you, I believe has to be discussed, and there has to be what we deal with is one-way attack drones.
One-way attack drones.
One-way attack drones. They have totally changed war. If you look at what the Ukrainians have done with relatively inexpensive, simple weapons with the ability to drop. It's more than a grenade, but the ability to take a one-way attack drone that maybe you have $5,000 in and hit a multi-million-dollar tank and just totally destroy that tank. There's a certain amount of war that's economics. There's a lot of war actually that's economics. And so the question becomes, if you look at the way we are in the Middle East where we had forward operating bases, how do you have a forward operating base if your adversary can hit that base with a one-way attack drone? And so the one-way attack drones, how we defend ourselves, we know how to make. The question is, how do you defend yourselves?
On the topic of Ukraine, when you talk to your Republican colleagues and also constituents about the issue of why the U.S. should continue to support Ukraine, what arguments do you make?
So I encourage people to look at a map. I encourage them to look at where the Port of Odessa is. I encourage them to understand that from the standpoint of the global food supply, the Port of Odessa is arguably the most important port in the world. Ukraine was known as the breadbasket of Europe. Factually speaking, it was the largest supplier of a lot of products to the UN World Food Program. Without the ability to get stuff out of that Port of Odessa, you're talking about huge increases in the price of food for a large portion of the world population. And I do not believe for 1 second that Putin actually wanted Ukraine, I don't think that he wanted control of the Black Sea, because control of the Black Sea gives them control of all of those economies. And so NATO needs a Black Sea strategy. They have not had one. I'm not saying he wouldn't take Ukraine to the earlier. I'm saying that if Putin could get, a couple of dollars for every bushel of grain that left the Port of Odessa to share with the oligarchs, I think that that would have been a huge victory for him. And I'm glad that he does not have the Port of Odessa, and under no circumstances, or cannot afford for Putin.
Moving on to Taiwan and China. You did bring up what would happen if Taiwan chose to, so I would love to invite you to elaborate more on what would happen domestically, but let's first start with analysts saying that a Chinese blockade of Taiwan is a real possibility. This would be devastating. It's an island. It imports most of its food and fuel. Taiwan produces 90% of the world's advanced semiconductors. How would you advise the Trump administration to respond to this or any kind of military action?
So I'm gonna answer that, but I want you to know this. I personally think that the Chinese will take Taiwan through economic origin, not through military force. There are other people that look at the exact same information that I look at, and they think that they're gonna take military force. It's just a difference of opinions and see. China, you have to accept the fact that China can take anything on the mainland side of the straits, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. Period. They have not done that. They have gotten more aggressive with their patrols around Australia. They have gotten very aggressive in the building of islands, which is outside of the norms. So the Chinese are pushing they've pushed beyond the norm, the global norms, if you will, with regard to how you do things. You've got Japan, you've got India, you've got Australia and the US and what we call the Quad. So it's not just a US based decision. If one of them decides they've had enough and they go, then we probably end up in that money. I think the issue with Taiwan is making sure that they continue to increase their domestic capabilities in their ability to survive long enough that the world has a chance to respond. And I would also suggest to you that I think that what the US based industry did with pulling all of their industry out of Russia, it is probably a wake-up call for the Chinese, and that if US industry responded the same way they did China, if they were aggressive towards Taiwan, then it will collapse the Chinese economy, and they care more about their regime than they care about that.
To be fair, the Chinese market is much bigger than the Russian market. Can we
That's,
trust our companies to do that?
I have that same question in my mind. I will tell you that in the case of an all-out war, I do think that they well, and if they didn't, then obviously you've got a president that would be pretty aggressive, make it a costly decision to stay. We don't want war with China. I understand that. We don't want war with China. I want them to get back to being an aggressive economic competitor. Don't see that happening. But I do think with regard to Taiwan, that the leadership of China recognizes that if they take it by force, then they would have guerrilla warfare on their hands for certainly the foreseeable future.
When you say that Taiwan should be ready to defend itself for just long enough for the world to respond, how would the world respond? What we know now?
I think the world would. You got China and the Quad, so you got Japan, you got India, you got Australia, you got the United States. Obviously, those are the most important four. I hope we don't find out.
Good answer. Let's move to more domestic issues. Yeah, specifically, your military installations, as well as in neighboring second, I did a little research between the two districts and 3 installations, about 32,000 federal workers are employed. For Benning, Moody, and Robbins, how have they been impacted by the Department of Government Efficiency?
I think there's actually more than that. But,
There's more, okay.
But that's, and I have family that works at the bases. There's also the Marine Corps Logistics Base in Albany. So I have nieces, I have cousins, I have family that works at those bases. I think the issue was, and I said this, in a meeting in DC, I'm like, we have to measure twice in government. We have a $2 trillion deficit. We have pretty good tax revenues right now, right? I mean, if you look at the last 24 months, it's probably the highest 24 months of tax revenue we've ever had. Yet we're still running a $2 trillion deficit. So there's some cuts that have to happen. I think the issue with the bases is making sure that they continue to be mission focused. And if you're talking about Robbins Air Force Base, you're talking about the majority of those jobs are tied to getting our weapon systems up to date. Sometimes it's taking an old F-16 or an old C-130 and rebuilding it into a new one. Sometimes it's software updates, but the majority of those people are showing up every day. They're working, a lot of them break a sweat, 40 plus hours a week. I think the majority of the reductions that will actually come about from DOGE will be in of the bureaucratic segment of the agencies. And I do not think that it will be significant. It's a significant above 5% of those that are actually out there working on the basis.
Well, I guess we'll find out. It'll take a few months for the data to come.
Well, and look, I mean, I've got a niece who, she has to fill out what are the 5 things that you accomplished this week? That's a pretty good, I mean, for anybody in the private sector, that's a pretty good, view every day. What did you accomplish today? What did you accomplish this week? What did you accomplish this month? I can tell you as a small business owner, if you don't have goals, you're not going to be in business very long. And so I would say that, maybe it's kind of the way it was said more than what was actually said. I think, people have the problem. And I think most Americans realize you got a $2 trillion deficit. There are going to be some changes. There have to be some changes, or you're going to lose the value of the dollar as the world currency. And then you're talking about huge economic changes in our country. And so we're going to make the changes, and we're going to do it in I expect a pretty manner. Let me say this, and I will say this because I had a group of hospital administrators in front of me the other day, and they were talking about the tax cuts. You realize we're not talking about reducing anybody's rate. It's what I asked the hospital administrators, and they didn't realize that. We're not talking about rate reductions. We're talking about for the most part, it's an extension of the current tax law.
2017 tax law.
Yeah, I mean, we're reaching the 10-year mark. And so you would have a reversion to the old rates, which would be higher rates on virtually every working American. So we're not talking about giving somebody who makes $1 million a year a lower tax rate than they currently have. We're talking about everybody maintaining their current tax rates. Now there's some caveats to that, and that no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security benefits, and most people in this room probably realize it, but a lot of people don't. You pay income tax on what you put into the Social Security system. It's the only retirement plan in the world where you're taxed on what you put in and taxed on what you pull out. So there's some things that are going to be there that are going to help. It's going to help people, but we're not talking about cutting tax rates. We're talking about maintaining the current rate.
Well, to be fair to our audience, I know that the House leadership put out a budget, and I haven't had time to unpack it because it just happened. So you all may have a question about that, to dig into that and other more domestic issues.
Yesterday.
We'll put out yesterday. I still haven't had time to hack it.
How many pages is it?
But as a professional journalist, I like to do my homework before asking a congressman a question in an open forum. To disaster relief. This is very large for your district and to be fair, the entire state of Georgia. The Trump administration recently denied requests for federal aid to states hit by natural disasters, even red states, as the headlines will share with us. Considering the Trump administration's stance on reducing or eliminating FEMA, how has this policy affected recovery efforts currently, and how are they planning for the future, I should say, people and businesses, especially farmers?
So I think FEMA would still exist. It would just not be a separate agency. They would bring it under the management of the existing agencies. I have a fair amount of experience with disaster. Hurricane Michael straddled the 2nd and the 8th, which is kind of in Bishop's district and my district. He and I were the two that got the plus up for the farmers. Estimates were originally, or we thought OMB was going to allow a total of $1 billion for all agriculture for all states. And the timber loss in Florida, alone in Florida was over $1 billion. So Sanford Bishop and I, a guy named Michael Reed, who you probably have never met. He was Sanford's chief of staff, but was an appropriation, just literally expert. And he's deceased now, but he did untold something good for this state. And that's just one example where he helped to get that plus up for us. But remember this, FEMA, we are contracting for services through the local government. So it's FEMA, GEMA to the local government. So the local government is hiring somebody to come in and fix the roads, hiring somebody to clean up the debris, hiring someone to do whatever needs to be done. It is Georgia Power or your EMCs that are getting lights put back on. It is your local cities, your local governments that are actually performing the work for the American citizens, your local hospitals. And that those costs get submitted to GEMA then submits them to FEMA. FEMA then reimburses for them. So FEMA is an agency. It is more of a banking function than
First responder.
So they're first on the scene a lot, but it's a coordination agency. But most of the states today, GEMA does an exceptionally good job. Most of the states today have the capacity to handle a lot of it without federal oversight of the disaster. FEMA is the one that the money flows through to pay the bills. And so that's going to continue. That's going to continue.
The money will continue.
The money will continue.
What are the money address?
I do not expect disaster or money to dry up. I just don't.
Right. There's so much more to ask. I would like to turn it to our audience now. I've been peppering you with questions because I wanted to cover a lot of ground. So why don't we move to Q&A, and Anderson here has the audience microphone. And please introduce yourself.
Certainly. Thank you, Congressman, for being here with us today. I'm Michael O'Reilly. I'm with the Nature Conservancy.
Okay.
And really appreciate your leadership in working to establish the state of Georgia's first national park reserve. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit about why the creation of the Okogie Mounds National Park Reserve is important to you. And how can we help you get that through?
So this has been a piece of legislation that we have worked very much in a bipartisan manner, both at the local, the state, and the federal level. It's very frustrating that when I think we had all but one member of Congress from Georgia sign the legislation last year that we're not able to actually get it across the finish line. Hopefully this year we won't have to deal with boundary changes and other things. Get it across the finish line, and ultimately It gives us the chance to preserve land that will be open to recreational use and preserve that heritage, you know, of the Indians that this is their home territory. And kind of I mean, it's been frustrating that it's taken this long to get done. We had another issue the other day. One of the other Indian tribes wanted to make sure that this tribe, that's their home territory, was not allowed to put a casino there. Well, that's not legal in the state of Georgia anyway, and there was no intent to put a casino there. So it was a minor change to the language that we agreed to, but just hopefully it gets done and across the finish line.
Thank you.
What other questions do we have from the audience? We have one right here. Please introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm Charles Shapiro, and I'm a retired guy, but also a retired U.S. diplomat and former president of the World Affairs Council of Atlanta. And I actually have two unrelated questions. I'll ask one and nobody else's question has it. So first one is, can you bring us up to date on Ukraine?
Ukraine.
Yeah, because over the weekend there were developments. Putin said he wanted to talk directly to Zelensky, and then Zelensky said, sure, I'll meet you in Turkey. And anyhow, what is going on, and what's going on with the Trump administration efforts to bring war to a close?
Yes, so the only thing I've seen is what you've seen in the news. I have not seen anything in DC. I do not trust Putin in any way, shape. If you look, there was basically there was an agreement on the Black Sea, and then Putin says yes, and as soon as we have this agreement on the Black Sea, and then they add to it, and as soon as all of the sanctions on Russia's economy are lifted, then we'll start to comply with the agreement that we agreed to a couple days ago. So Putin always adds a condition. I do think President Trump has gotten very tired of Putin's refusal to operate in good faith. So, I mean, I've never expected Putin to operate in good faith. He's actually a fairly predictable individual. Every 4 years, he tried to take another piece of property, somebody, territory. If you look at the way they've treated Ukrainian citizens in areas where they've gone in, I mean, I don't know what to tell you about where it is in Ukraine. I just don't. I will say this though. I don't think it's fair to blame President Trump for where we currently are. And so if we're honest about what allowed the war to keep going, it was a refusal to enforce the sanctions against Russia. If we had enforced the sanctions against Russia, then they would not have had the money to continue to build their military machine the way they have. To Putin's credit, he took, the billions of dollars from illegal oil sales and he put it 100% into his military capabilities. So, it was, I think the Greeks are the ones that sold the majority of the tankers for the Russian ghost fleet, the refusal to shut down the ghost fleet. There are European banks that are continuing to do business in Russia. There are a lot of people to blame for where we currently are. And I will tell you, we would not be here right now if we had enforced the sanctions against Russia's citizens.
Thank you. Thank you. That's terrific. Can I ask a second question? The Republicans are looking for a candidate to run for the United States Senate in 2026. Is that something you consider?
Only a retiree could ask that.
One thing for the question, I think, if I have a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old at the house, and my wife and I had very brief conversation about it. I'm vice chair of ag, on intel, on rules, on armed services, 55. You're talking about a situation where you would be totally starting over, even if you got elected at the age of 55, and you're talking about a statewide position, which makes it very hard to be a good dad, a good husband. And so I promise you, I'm gonna be a good dad and a good husband. And we'll work the rest of the stuff out.
If you endorse any other candidates or backing one of those who've thrown their hat in the ring?
I have not, and I will tell you, this is one of those situations, I'm going to speak just as a Republican now. Where, the best thing for our party, in my opinion, would be if Kemp and Trump could endorse the same person. That would be helpful from the standpoint of a Republican primary. The other things that Republicans have to recognize, and most Republicans don't right now, is that Kamala Harris got 70,000 more votes in 2024 than Joe Biden did in 2020. So, in the state of Georgia, if you pull the 2020 count what Biden got, and you pull the 2024 count, what Kamala Harris got right at 70,000 more votes than Joe Biden did. And I will remind you now, Joe Biden, I'm not saying he was conservative, I'm saying that Democratic primary, Joe Biden ran as the conservative Democrat, right? He won the primary as the conservative Democrat, he then governed it much more left than he ran as, but Georgia Republicans don't need to think that this is a slam dunk. I mean, after all, you've got two Democratic senators right now. You also have a Republican governor. I mean, it's more of a pinkish state than a purple state, in my opinion.
I think you're right.
But I mean, ag is extremely important to the state. So having somebody that doesn't support agriculture would be a problem with the Republican Party. Having somebody that did not recognize the role of our military installations in not just national but global security be a challenge for us. And so I just hope that I do not hope that I'm not in favor of a quick endorsement. I think that we need to let this thing play out, and then hopefully, you know, as the end of the year approaches, first of next year, we would have an endorsement from Donald Trump and Brian Kemp. That's what I would hope for. And then there's going to be a big fight.
What other questions do we have?
Congressman, Jim Bruce from Matruis. You mentioned at the beginning that you don't support the escalatory strategy around tariffs that was launched basically April 2nd. So my question to you is, how do you voice your concern to the administration given the seat that you sit in? And the reason I ask is, it seems as if the only time we began to see a reversal on this escalatory strategy was after the equity markets had sold off substantially. And then it was contemporaneous with the 10-year Treasury note yield starting to rise, suggesting that bond markets were selling off as well. So there was just a flight from all U.S. assets regardless. And so I'm curious how you have the ability to impact and voice the concerns of your constituents and yourself.
I say the same thing that I've said from the start, which is what I believe, which is that a tariff of 15% on a country that is charging us 15% with the goal to get to zero is in the best interest of both of the countries. That's what I believe. I do not believe that both countries, that maybe we don't end up at 0% in that particular scenario. Maybe we end up at 5%, but the lower tariff is better for everybody. We have the best market in the world. We have the market that everybody wants to be in. And I do not think that we can just look the other way, where in some cases there's blatant advantage being taken of us. In some cases it's the way they fund their government. I mean, some countries only have tariffs to fund their government. That's the way they chose to do things. But I just continue to say what I believe is that you know, out the what we want to call it, retaliatory or doesn't matter to me, but if a country's taxing us 15% and we tax them 15% to get, with the goal to get to zero, I'm okay with that. I don't like the tone, if you will, and I don't like it going up one day and down the next, and I'm glad I'm not in business anymore and trying to deal with it.
Do Congress, men and women have the ability on either party, in particular Republicans, given the executive branch is Republican today, is there a mechanic to voice your concerns up the chain, or is it just public, dissemination and hope that you're
Oh,
heard?
we voice those concerns, we voice them very carefully, though. All kidding aside, I've found that as long as I'm respectful with the administration, then it's okay to speak your piece. When you're disrespectful, then there's a problem. But, and I think there's a problem with any administration when you're disrespectful to them. It's just this one, sometimes.
What other questions do we have from the audience?
Jimmy, I don't know. I have a question about, you're on the Intelligence Committee. What are your thoughts on, Iran? And then what actions do you see? How do you see some issues playing out as far as their nuclear capabilities over the?
As a member, well, as a member of the intelligence, I can't answer that. Here's what I'll tell you in general. Once someone learns how to do something, you're not gonna unlearn it, right? So once someone knows how to do it, the path is much faster to actually getting it done. They've never stopped learning. So I'm worried about a nuclear weapon, but I also, I worry about biological, I worry about chemical, I worry about a lot of it. But I'll also tell you that I do believe that there are a lot of men and women that get up in support of not just America, but other countries that share our interests and our values, and are doing a pretty good job of protecting us from a nuclear attack. And I don't worry as much about our ability to defend ourselves from Iran as I'm worried about some of the materials making their ways into the hands of terrorists. And if you want to talk about India, Pakistan, same thing there, two nuclear armed states. Both of them have the ability to put a weapon together pretty quick. I worry about someone getting their hands on that weapon. Those two countries don't have the same security protocols that the United States or any of our NATO partners would have regard to nuclear weapons. So the difference with Iran is that Iran has just shown a willingness to openly fund terrorism, provide terrorism of money and weapons. And so the big question is, what do they do with it? They give it to a terrorist. I don't trust them not to. I can tell you that. I think terrorists could steal it from some other countries. Iran is probably the only one that actually give it to them.
Please join me in thanking Congressman Austin Scott for joining us today. We have a gift that we'd like to present to you. This is a World Affairs Council Atlanta tie.
Wonderful.
It's branded, so I can give it to a member of Congress. It's not just a gift. It's got our logo on it and our name. And we hope that you wear it with pride.
Thank you.
And I do have, while you have your mic on, I do have.
Good looking tie.
It's a great looking tie.
It is.
Ambassador Shapiro.
Color blue.
I have one more question.
Where's it made?
I actually just asked, it's made in China. I just sent an email to the company in Chicago and I said, what would it be to put in another order? And they gave me the rundown, plus a 15% tariff. 15, this was a couple weeks ago. But it was the first time, I don't know if any of you had that moment where you actually saw the China tariff on your invoice, right?
China pick.
China ways. But it was an interesting moment, like as an American citizen, oh, they're line iteming this China tariff. Will you share with us why you think organizations like the World Affairs Council of Atlanta are important today?
Oh, yeah, because you can have an honest conversation with people that don't necessarily agree with you on everything. And you know, just don't discount, the damage that's being done by the computer warriors, the keyboard warriors, you know, Facebook, Twitter, the entire society yeah, I got a 25-year-old. I've also got to mention my 7-year-old, my 10-year-old, my 25-year-old's growing. He better be off the wallet. He got married a couple of weeks ago, so I'm assuming he is. You've got to have the ability to bounce ideas off of other people that present solutions to the challenges. And the most frustrating thing in Congress right now is the role that social media is playing, and it gets to play that role because of a lack of journalism. There's not, I mean, I watch BBC for the news for the most part, especially if I want to see what's going on with India and Pakistan or Middle East or anything. I go to non-US based news sources, and that bothers me as an American. The country's so divided right now. You gotta have these forums for people to talk about what they're hearing and to find those 80% solutions.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.